Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Access Vikings podcast. I'm Emily Leiker, joined by my Minnesota Star Tribune colleagues, Andrew Krammer and Ben Goessling. And it is not feeling like summer outside or looking like summer outside in Minnesota right now, but summer break for us and for the Vikings. Kevin O'Connell canceled their final week of OTAs after minicamp ended yesterday. Ben, I guess, what does it say about how this team did through the first part of the offseason program and then wrapping up in minicamp that Kevin decided to cancel things?
Well, I don't know if it matters a whole lot in terms of looking for deeper meaning. Coaches love to do this where they put the extra weekend and they cancel it, or they turn it into like paintball or bowling or something just to kind of look like the hero so that, you know, you put something in and then you can take it away so that you score some points with your players. But it's probably a good sign that they were able to get enough work in over those couple of weeks that they deemed it sufficient to send guys home for the summer. And I think it's probably credit to Kevin O'Connell for reading the room and saying, I don't need to bring these guys back to play paintball because I've got enough older players that would rather just be home. Harrison Smith would probably rather be home with his kids. And you've got guys like Javon Hargrave, Jonathan Allen that are trying to take care of their bodies, and they don't need to go out and do some, team bonding thing just for the sake of being in Minnesota for an extra week. So, yeah, I think all of it is kind of par for the course in the NFL, but the fact that they got what they needed in over those couple of weeks, especially with Justin Jefferson being here as much as he was. Kevin O'Connell was pretty emphatic about how important that was, and I'm sure we'll get into more of that. But yeah, I think they were able to get the work done that they needed enough for Kevin O'Connell to be able to dangle the carrot in front of them and say, we'll get rid of this extra week and give you guys an extra week of summer.
Yeah, we know Kevin's the master of that, right? Just kind of trying to push and pull when he feels like his players need it. And this Vikings roster might be one of the oldest again in the NFL, right? They got just 5 draft picks. It's not like you've got this giant rookie class to train up necessarily. So obviously you want JJ McCarthy to have as much time as possible. But I do find it interesting when Kevin decides to push and pull and kind of give players a reward. And in this instance, as you mentioned, they had what Kevin called some of their best attendance. Obviously points out Jefferson, who says he had his best offseason attendance of his NFL career. I'm sure he attended quite a bit. Well, he wouldn't have, I suppose, in 2020. It would have been his rookie year when
there wasn't one.
Took all that out. So he doesn't make it too much of a habit of showing up for every single day, but he's talked about the importance of that. So it does seem to be that they feel at a comfortable place, at least where this offense is at, where McCarthy is at. And obviously that's the most important thing.
And obviously these guys will get out of town for a little bit, go somewhere sunny, go somewhere nice, go to a nice event, whatever. But it did sound like there is going to be a core of them that just stay in Minnesota for the next 5 weeks. We heard from JJ McCarthy again yesterday. We had heard from him at the start of the offseason program and then at the start of the OTAs and then to wrap up minicamp. And his summer to-do list it just sounded like homework leaving minicamp. He was like, I'm going to study the playbook, I'm going to rejuvenate my body, and I'm going to track down my teammates wherever they are in the country or the world and make sure that we're throwing together. Also has a baby shower on the docket. He did put that out there, but it sounded like Justin Jefferson plans on staying around. JJ made it sound like that. Justin himself made it sound like that he'll at least be in town enough for JJ to get some of that work in with him, continue doing that. Jordan Addison, I think, is going to be involved in that a little bit. What do we think of just the fact that not only did these guys stick around for OTAs and come to OTAs and show up as much as they did, but are also willing to keep working even when they are veterans and they don't need this work? It's mostly JJ who needs this work with them.
I mean, I think the fact that Kevin O'Connell made it as big of a deal as he did, that Justin Jefferson was here, both, telling him, I want you here. And then even the moment yesterday, as lighthearted as it was, Kevin O'Connell finishes his press conference. Justin Jefferson is kind of hanging out in the back and doing the thing that you'll see players do sometimes where they like to pretend they're reporters and ask a question. And then O'Connell says, I got a question for you. So Jefferson gets to the podium. O'Connell says, what was the biggest thing you learned or gained from being here this offseason? And Jefferson kind of gives the the standard answer. And O'Connell says, I'm going to take that as a guarantee that you're going to be here next year, in the offseason program more consistently. Jefferson kind of laughs it off and says, hey, well, we got to talk about that. I don't know that I want to be.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later on. Next question.
You could tell it was important to Kevin O'Connell that Justin Jefferson was here for this one, and probably all of them, but the fact that he essentially wanted to put him on the spot and have it on camera, have it in front of reporters that, yeah, this was actually a beneficial thing. I think O'Connell sees that as especially beneficial for JJ McCarthy, because those two did not get much time throwing together last year. Obviously, JJ McCarthy was mostly working with the 2s and 3s per our rep counting during the training camp period where we saw JJ McCarthy. And that's not going to be the case this year. So he wants those two to have as much time together as possible. And it sounds like they got a lot of it. And we saw them at the Timberwolves games a couple of times, and they share marketing people. And I think there were some content strategies that came from those things. But there is, whether it was the softball game, whether it was just being on the field together, they got more time in these few weeks than they've probably had to just be around each other and to work with each other. So I think that was awfully important to O'Connell. And the fact that he brought it up as much as he did, I think is pretty indicative of what he thought of it.
Yeah, and Ben, I think it's funny you bring up Kevin dropping off the rep count thing, right? Because he doesn't want us or anybody in media over analyzing McCarthy at this point, but it's not stopping national outlets, people just picking up tweets and being like, oh, I see he threw an interception this day, and oh, there's an interception on this day.
Yeah.
It must mean he's doing poorly. So he commended us for at least not overreacting locally, but it's easy to read too much into these things, and for O'Connell to feel so good to be like, you know what, JJ, we don't need this last week of OTAs. JJ also talked about how good physically he feels, which is noteworthy considering how much time he's had off of the practice field and now getting all these hours in these past few weeks. So it's notable, like we're talking about, that they decided to just kind of punt on this, and O'Connell's the one really who knows most about where McCarthy's going to be, and obviously tracking where he needs to be come week one, because the way that he talked about the rest of the quarterback room, he says he's excited. He praised Max Brosmer, but it wasn't like he was glowing about Sam Howell or Brett Rippon necessarily this spring.
Right. He made a comment, something about like, oh, sometimes Sam makes a throw that like we see out of JJ, but like in the sense that like JJ's young and still learning and hasn't seen on-field reps, and Sam was a starter for a whole season in Washington. So like you're a little like, okay, well, we'll see how that goes. I guess we should say we haven't talked about the quarterback room as a whole. Sam was the one we saw predominantly taking the number 2 snaps at this point. It was usually like JJ with the ones, and then they'd have Brosmer just kind of watching and not really. Brosmer didn't really get a ton of reps at all in OTAs, I felt like. And then Rippon and Sam Howell off to the side doing kind of mixed 2s and 3s work.
Yeah, that I thought it was noteworthy when he was talking about Brosmer and just praising him and just trying to say, look, this kid is smart. He knows as much as anybody at this point of his career. I think, or he said, as a rookie who hasn't gotten a ton of actual reps. And then he talked about his command of the information. And I don't remember verbatim what he said, but he stopped himself because he said it's on par with, and then he said Brett Rippon, and then he kind of went on a non sequitur about Brett Rippon because he doesn't want to try and compare these guys. I'm sure he doesn't want to make Brett feel like he's behind, or that Max is too far ahead because it's only June. But I wonder how fluid this whole situation is, because obviously last year the pecking order was also fluid, but we knew the main players. We knew it was going to be Darnold. We knew McCarthy might get up to maybe the backup job, if not take the starting job over at some point. But this one seems basically wide open behind McCarthy as QB1.
Yeah, I mean, he was high enough on Max Brosmer that I think it will be interesting to watch that. And they've been high on him for a while. I mean, he's talked about it. And I can remember when Brosmer got here the year before, I mean, basically the spring before he was going to be the Gophers QB, when he transferred from New Hampshire, he was at that pro day and was able to participate in that. And I remember watching him throw there. And I think the coaches certainly took note of him there as well. And so it's something that they have kept an eye on for a while. And, people will have their fun with it, but Kevin O'Connell and PJ Fleck have a pretty good relationship. I gather that the two of them compare notes and want to be supportive of one another to a fairly large degree. And I think, we can say what we want about PJ Fleck, and I certainly have over the years, but they have produced more NFL players out of our dear alma mater, Andrew, than they have in quite a while. So I think that is something that you're seeing a little bit more of an acknowledgement of, I think, from the Vikings, and a little bit more of a presence over there. I mean, the fact that they are at that pro day with just about everybody to the degree that they are, is some of it is to support what's happening at the U, but I think some of it is there are more players there that they want to get a look at than you might have seen in the past. It's a reflection of the change from the previous regime to this one on the Viking side, but also probably the progression that you see on the Gopher side of things. So it does mean there's more information going back and forth between the two of them. And I'm sure Kevin O'Connell and PJ Fleck have talked quite a bit about, okay, what did you have him doing here? What does that match to in our system? What kinds of things is he good at learning? So there's a degree of information you can get about a guy like that because of that relationship and because of the locality of everything that probably helps him kind of with his transition and may help him in the mix of competing for a job here.
Yeah, and on that topic, it made me think of, I was talking to Mike Pettin yesterday, the assistant head coach for the Vikings, and it was his first story for a accelerator diversity summit program he runs for entry-level coaches. But he mentioned about Kevin O'Connell and saying that Kevin will sit in on these meetings that we do with these young coaches, and we'll have these young coaches pitch us presentations on, some coaches who are defensive backs guys will do third down defense or whatever, coverages or whatever. They'll pick something they're passionate about. And he said Kevin will sit there through every single one of them and watch them because he doesn't care where these ideas come from. And he's not as paranoid as some other guys that I've worked with. And Patton talked about, he said, I've been in places where even in this time of year, he's talking about May and June, guys act like we have these nuclear codes on the walls and we just can't let any coaches in and no colleges can come in. And yesterday, the end of minicamp, the entire Gopher staff is there, including PJ Fleck. And that's not uncommon. We saw them do that last year, the year before. Ever since O'Connell came here, they've tried to have kind of an open door policy with that program. And it's not just that program. It's coaching friends in coaching circles across the league from other teams. It is interesting to see how they approach it because we jab them a lot. We're the media. We want our access walls to be torn down and we want everything that, open to us. And they do certainly put up those walls at times like any NFL team. But as far as NFL paranoia goes, to your point about them sharing notes with the Gopher staff, it sounds like not everybody does that.
Well, and it makes me think a little bit of, Brian Flores has talked about this with his year at Pitt. And being around Pat Narduzzi, a lot of the way the Vikings play defense now stems from that year that Brian Flores was in Pittsburgh, where the Steelers and Pitt share a practice facility. So a lot of those hot coverages that the Vikings play, the hot zone stuff that they like to put behind blitzes, comes from Narduzzi at Pitt. And there was, I think, a little bit of an information sharing thing that probably has helped the Vikings in that regard. Certainly has helped the Vikings in that regard because a lot of the defense that has become what we know of the Vikings under Brian Flores started there. So I think there's probably a couple of coaches in the Vikings meetings saying, hey, there's a lot we can actually learn from just picking each other's brains. So, how much high level offensive strategy you're going to get from, the University of Minnesota these days is a question, I suppose, but that'll be my last one, I promise. But I do think that openness is something that you have a lot of coaches on both sides of the ball for the Vikings saying this is a beneficial thing. If there's people that we think are smart and trustworthy and we can learn from, let's do it.
I heard PJ has a trick play to beat Penn State when you're at the goal line at the end of the game.
See, this is why, for anybody that's rolling their eyes at us, this is why we do it, because we've put up with it. We've had to suffer through it. We wanted to be in Pasadena once, not for a regular season game against UCLA. That's it.
And you were the Glenn Mason era, but I was the Tim Brewster era. Yeah. So the fact that PJ
couple
Fleck
of gems.
The fact that PJ Fleck is dialing up these plays to at least NFL draft picks named Ariante Ursary, these trick plays, at least the guy was an NFL draft pick. Back when I was watching, it was not an NFL draft pick.
Well, there were quite a few in the Mace era. I mean, you had the running backs, obviously, Maroney and Barber, and a lot of linemen, Esslinger and Ben Hamilton and Mark Sederstrom. So quite a few guys on that front actually ended up being pretty successful NFL players. And then, the defender here and there, I suppose, but it was a lot of offensive linemen, a lot of guys coming out of that running game. Gary Russell had a little bit of a run, but yeah, not so much in the Basement Brew era.
Yeah, we had Eric Decker.
That was about it.
I'm sorry, Emily. I'm sorry.
all this Gophers talk. I was just
yeah.
I only know this era of Gophers. Anyway, we were talking about openness, which is actually a good transition to I think the other part of Jefferson's comments yesterday, the non-McCarthy part of Jefferson's comments yesterday, which were about some of his wide receiver teammates in Jordan Addison and Jalen Nailor, both of whom, I mean, Jalen Nailor's come out of his shell in that one, he's probably in a larger pad size now because he's put on bulk and is bigger, but both him
literally
and
has
Jordan,
come out of his shell.
Yes, yeah, literally has come out of his shell. And then metaphorically, both of them we're seeing a little bit more energy. I think that like Justin also talked about seeing some more energy out of them. Andrew, you wrote about this. I guess what particularly stood out to you in hearing about the change in demeanor in those guys?
Yeah, well, it was actually what Kevin O'Connell said about those guys when he said, we've had the most time together this since I've been here in terms of when he said that group and what it's going to look like in terms of the top three receivers. And he kind of said it without saying it, that Jordan Addison was banged up his rookie year, missed a bunch of time in OTAs, and Jalen Nailor every spring is dealing with something except for this spring. So I think that's the biggest thing is he was healthy, the bulked up, whatever he did. He's talked in the past about, because we've done the injury prevention stories with him, about how he embraced Pilates, and he does that as much as anybody on the team, and really tried to find ways to stay healthy. But if this helped him, just getting bigger, for what Jefferson seemed to kind of drop would be maybe more of a run blocking role, because Jefferson said we need him to go in there and hit those defensive ends,
right? Much
like a Rams 3 receiver rushing attack would ask those guys to do. So I found that to be interesting as well. So maybe those things jive. But the fact that Nailor's bigger, the fact that he's, as according to Jefferson, talking more, if he can kind of continue his progression, because he, when healthy, has always gotten better every year, at least when he's been out there. So he comes off the career high year of just 400 yards. There's not a whole lot to go around in this offense, but if he can hold down that spot and especially give them some run blocking when they decide to go 3 wide, that's going to be huge. And then I also thought it was interesting that Jefferson said a lot about Addison and a lot about just like, I'm kind of trying to pull him out of his shell and trying to encourage him. And he said, the team needs us to be on our A game. I think he's wearing the fact that not only is it important for him to be at OTAs and build this rapport with McCarthy, but that come Sundays, him and Addison, and obviously Hawkinson, obviously Aaron Jones and all these other guys, but him and Addison need to be the stars of the show when you've got a young guy in JJ McCarthy, who I believe Ben said we need our yak and our rack to be on point this year.
He did talk quite a bit about yak and rack, which are the same thing, just different.
Right. I was like, wait, are they different?
No,
I thought those were the same.
And not really. I mean, it's yards after catch or run after catch. It's the same thing. You're not going to get yards by doing something other than running, unless
cartwheeling, backflipping. Leaping? Did the Saquon Barkley leap count as yak or rack?
Would probably be yards. It's not really running. Well, I mean, if you get face masked, it's yards after catch, but it's not running. I don't know. People probably don't care about this, but yeah, I mean, it is interesting because I think even Andrew, when you bring up the wide receivers spending as much time together as they are, that is yet another Kevin O'Connell way of mentioning the fact that Justin Jefferson was in the building.
Well, that too.
Which is not, I mean, he wanted as many chances to reinforce the fact that that was important as he could get. So I think that's part of what he's saying there too. But I think the idea that this receiver group understands their role in this offense is pretty significant, because was chatting with people this week during practice just about the difference in this iteration of a young quarterback coming in with a high-powered offense. The last time we saw something quite to this degree in Minnesota probably would have been 25 years ago when Dante Culpepper takes over in his second year, was the 11th pick in the draft in 99, I believe, and then is starting in 2000. And that's obviously Randy Moss, Chris Carter. So you're coming into a situation with these two stars, and probably Moss and Jefferson. I think you can debate who's the bigger star of the two. I guess I would still tend to say Moss for how transformational he was, but Jefferson is as big of a star as they get in this day and age too. But I think the major difference is Chris Carter is at a level that Jordan Addison, even as good as he's been, was not at the year 2000. If you're kind of taking the parallel, just Chris Carter had played longer, had been more accomplished. There's certainly a level of stature with a receiver like that is a little bit different, but you also had two guys there, I think, that were probably a little more, shall we say, particular about their targets and how many they were going to get. So I think that effect that those receivers have on a young quarterback, and I asked O'Connell about this a little bit yesterday with Jefferson, just the fact that Jefferson's word to quarterbacks is always, there's a lot of trust me, because, get me the ball when you're in trouble. But a lot of it last year was trust yourself. I remember sitting down with Jefferson before the season, and that was his main message to both Darnold and McCarthy is, you guys can play at this level. Trust yourselves that you can make all the throws. And I think the messaging to the quarterback from a receiver of Jefferson in particular's stature is important to O'Connell. And I think a lot of these things of him being there and the interactions taking a certain sort of texture is a lot of what Kevin O'Connell wanted out of this. So I think a lot of the reason he emphasized it as much as he did is he thinks those things are important. And that relationship is going to have a lot to do with everybody's livelihoods and success for the rest of this decade. Kevin O'Connell's livelihood depends on it. Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah's livelihood depends on it. Certainly the livelihood of J.J. McCarthy getting a second contract is going to depend on it too. So I think a lot of those things are what O'Connell is trying to emphasize and encourage when he's talking about these receivers and the role that they have in the whole thing.
A few more miscellaneous things to hit on. We should start with that. Right before minicamp started Tuesday morning, tight end Josh Oliver gets a contract extension, 3 years, $23.25 million, I believe are the terms there. We heard from Wes Phillips mainly, I think was the guy that we talked to about this or heard from about this. Ben, what did he say about Josh Oliver's specific role in this offense and how much it means to get him locked into, as you say, that future where so many people are relying on the success of this team?
Yeah, I mean, he called Josh Oliver the best blocking Y with pass game skills in the NFL. So basically an inline tight end that is going to be on the field in a blocking role quite a bit. That's why Josh Oliver is here. I mean, they've seen him as a receiver. We saw the play, I think, against the Giants week 1 last year where he gets the big gain on, I think, that 4 verticals concept that they had where they motioned CJ Ham out of the backfield. But that's coming out of a fairly heavy set. So there are things they can do with that. But a lot of it is Josh Oliver as a blocker. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting that Wes Phillips brought up was there are times where Josh Oliver can be singled up on a defensive end or just an edge rusher in a way that you would not trust a tight end to do very often. Pass rushers are typically saying, I'm not getting blocked by a tight end. Those guys can't handle me. But if you have a guy that can do that, you can reroute some help to other places at times. I mean, Kevin O'Connell talks about weighty downs quite a bit. Having a tight end that can handle a weighty down and pass protection where it's, hey, you've got this guy and there's not help coming your way. That is some of what I think they paid for. So, we can talk about whether this contract is worthwhile from a valuation standpoint. And I think I still need to look at void years and all of those kinds of things. So I imagine there are going to be some that ameliorate the cap hit a little bit. But I think part of what they are paying for here is another blocker that they say can be pretty helpful and effective. And as we've seen this offseason in particular, you pay a lot for good blocking. And if they're going to get that from Josh Oliver, I think it's part of why they said, yeah, this is worth us spending the money.
Yeah, a team that wants to play more bully ball on offense paid one of its biggest bullies that they've got. And then I think Wes Phillips said, we want him to be our first guy off the bus, the old football saying about their biggest dudes, so he it's incredible too, because he does have that receiving ability that's just underrated. And I think people forget about it because we've talked about it. He was a receiver coming out of San Jose State, or a receiving tight end who was bad at blocking. And then he came to the Vikings as a good blocker who wasn't thought of as a receiver. And he can do both. And this is a team that wants to run. When you watch them do their 7-on-7s, 11-on-11s, we see them start off in either 21 or 12 personnel. They want to run the ball. They want to establish these heavier personnel groupings and then leverage good third and fourth, whatever down and distances for McCarthy into success for the young kid, and have him play the position, the difficult parts of the position very few times throughout games. And so I think with Oliver, this deal makes sense, and people outside might look at it and say, well, the guy caught 200 or 300 yards, whatever. Why are they paying that much for him? It's just to push people around, as you said. And if you don't have a bunch of guys on the perimeter, certainly, as we talked about wide receivers who can do that, the guys who can do it at tight end become even more important. And for a team that wants to run the ball more effectively, as the Vikings do. Yeah.
I mean, whether it's Oliver, the investments on the interior offensive line, Jordan Mason, there is a difference with the way this team is constructed on offense. Yeah. I mean, we heard Kevin O'Connell talk about play style all the time last year. You could talk about that, but if you don't have the people to execute it, it's empty words. And I think the fact that they paid the people that they paid, and they paid Jordan Mason to come in, and I think it'd be a little more of that bully ball running back. I mean, they're very aware they did not run the ball well in goal-to-go situations. They did not run the ball well in short yardage situations. And one thing you can say for this front office and this regime is when they identify a problem, they do not waste a ton of time in addressing it. We saw it with the corners last year in training camp when they kept signing guys and kept bringing people in. We saw it with, firing Ed Donatel in year one, or after year one, I should say. They aren't standing on ceremony very often. It's, hey, this needs to get fixed. We need to fix it now, and we need to fix it with a lot of resources. So the fact that they did what they did, I think that Josh Oliver signing in a lot of ways fits pretty nicely into that, because the message has been pretty clear of what they want to be and where they want to emphasize things on offense in a way that's different than what they've done in the past. And I think Oliver is only another step in that direction.
Physical. They want to be physical.
Yeah.
Speaking of the O-line, we obviously, if you're listening, you've probably seen it by now, but we saw Christian Darrisaw this week. Andrew and I were ticking off our attendance sheet on Tuesday morning, and we're like, wait, that's Christian Darrisaw. It was a pleasant surprise. I don't think we were expecting him out there.
Yeah.
Everyone was still kind of, not cagey, that has a negative connotation, but everyone was still careful about saying too much about where he was in his timeline of recovery. But we did see him out Tuesday, Thursday. Everyone was very happy about that. KO, this is what KO said about it. He said, all I've told Christian is let's worry about that when it's time to worry about that, meaning when he comes back. All you can control is the here, the now, the present, and just continue to set weekly goals that he is crushing in a really positive way. He had a great line about we need to get Christian away from the trainers because he's going to start tossing them over the fence because he's so strong and ready to go again, which was interesting. So
he needed to block people his own size.
Yes. Yeah. He's got to block people his own size. He's back in the mix, or getting back in the mix. Will Fries obviously did not work out, but we did see him around practice a couple times. He came out there. Andrew, the one other one that we were getting some questions about and that we would kind of keep tabs on day to day was Rondale Moore. You want to just explain what we saw out of him?
Yeah, he didn't do a whole lot. He was working off to the side, warming up with the team, dressing up and all that to practice, but then spending much of it off to the side with trainers. And he's dealing with a knee injury that happened last August. So it's been quite a while for him. And what exactly he's dealing with hasn't been reported, I don't think, by anybody. So, and the team wasn't letting anybody talk to him this spring, which was interesting. So we'll have to see come training camp what he's dealing with, because the team is looking for him to, make the roster, the 53. And contribute. But yeah, Ben, I thought it was interesting that we saw Darrisaw out there, because everything we've heard, this O-line will come together come training camp, but we weren't really expecting those guys, or at least Darrisaw, to be out there till then.
No, I think it's a positive sign that even the little bit he was able to do is something they're comfortable enough with him going out there to do at this point. So yeah, everything we continue to hear is pretty optimistic about his timetable. And I think there's a little bit of cautious optimism in all of those things, but there is, I think, a pretty good feeling about where he's going to be. And the prospect that this line is kind of as we expect it to be constituted pretty early on. I mean, Will Fries, Kevin O'Connell has said he would expect to be ready to go for training camp. Yeah. So you have him. If you have Darrisaw back, you have Donovan Jackson probably at left guard. That's the 5 that they want. And if those guys are all ready to go, especially with 2 of them coming off pretty significant injuries between Fries and Darrisaw, that would be a nice win for this team in that how they want to play and how they want this group to look if they're able to get as much time from the start of training camp with all of these guys as they can. And we're going to still, I think, see them be cautious with Darrisaw, that the way they tend to work is erring on the side of caution. But yeah, I think all signs at this point are pretty optimistic for that group being able to come together the way they want it to in 2025.
We're going to talk a little bit more about minicamp, OTAs, the offseason via a mailbag episode next week. That'll be on your podcast feeds. For now, that's all we have. Thank you guys for listening. You can check out the stories we did this week. All of us wrote multiple times, had different stuff going on. And we have some feature stories out of OTAs and minicamp that'll be rolling here in the next week and a half or so. Find those on thestartribune.com. Be on the lookout for that mailbag next week, and then we'll talk to you guys again soon.